Welcome to the Irish Revolution. Last month, May 1919, we looked at the Knock-Long ambush and the first Dáil Courts. We also spoke a little bit about the Paris Peace Conference. This month, June 1919, we'll see Éireann de Valera leave for the United States in an effort to gain official recognition from the American government and to raise money for the cause. We'll also speak a little bit about the Paris Peace Conference and a few shootings and ambushes. So a few bios. We talked about Éireann de Valera and Harry Boland back in February. This month we'll cover Liam Mellows and John Devoy. Mellows because he would spend so much time in America with de Valera and Boland, and Devoy because he was the most important Irish-American figure of the age. Liam Mellows was born in England and his family moved to Ireland when he was 3 years old. Mellows would go on to be an active IRB man and was a founding member of the Irish Volunteers despite being only 21 years old at the time. Mellows would command the so-called Western Division of the Irish Volunteers during the Easter Rising. He led around 700 men in attacks around Galway and briefly occupied the town of Athenry before his poorly equipped force dispersed in the face of advancing British forces. He participated in de Valera's campaign in America and would return to Ireland later to become Director of Supplies of the IRA, responsible for purchasing arms. John Devoy was a leading light of Clan na Gael, the largest Irish-American political organisation of the time, and the editor of the Gaelic American newspaper, which had a large readership. He had been around for a long time by this stage, having met and worked with Charles Stuart Parnell in what seemed like ancient history. He was unusual among the revolutionary generation for his great age, as most prominent figures were younger men. So we'll start with the American mission. Éireann de Valera, President of the Republic, arrived in New York on June 11th after getting smuggled onto a boat from Liverpool. Harry Boland, who would go on to play such a key role in the American mission, along with Liam Mellows, arrived in America a month before in order to lay the groundwork for his president. I talk about the American mission in great detail in another special episode I did, but allow me to give a quick summary. The Republican delegation hoped to gain diplomatic recognition of the Irish Republic, spread propaganda and raise general consciousness among the American population. The Irish-American population outnumbered the population on the island of Ireland, and to raise money. Diplomatic recognition always seemed like a long shot, and the closest they would come to was an amendment to the Treaty of Versailles which would have implicitly recognised the Irish Republic. In the end, the treaty was voted down by the US Congress, so this turned out to be a moot point. Something that the Republican delegation was at one stage rather worried about was the Unionist delegation from Ulster, and while there was a powerful Irish-American Catholic movement in America, America was still at this time a very Protestant country, and this Ulster delegation found useful friends such as the Vice President Thomas Marshall and also the future President Calvin Coolidge, who was at this time the Governor of Massachusetts. Despite everything, however, the delegation would go on to be a gigantic success, raising $5 million for the cause, although this money was more fantastical than reality, as I explained in the other episode, and galvanising Irish America, utilising their soft power. How much impact it had on British policy is highly debatable, but I tend to think personally that it pushed for a moderating influence on British policy in Ireland. Let's have a look at a few ambushes and shootings. Although we're very far away from the war part of this conflict, there were still intermittent clashes. There was an ambush at Rathclaren in West Cork this month that won local rebels 5 Lee Enfield rifles. They had used only one shotgun and one revolver in the hold-up. Other units with far more weaponry would do very little. Units with very few weapons would prove to be imaginative. How much did local leadership determine the course of the conflict? It was everything. This will not be the last time we hear the adventures in County Cork. It's called the Rebel County for a reason by you. On 23rd of June, a district inspector in Thurles, County Tipperary, was shot by Jim Stapleton, a notorious gunman already linked to several shootings and attacks. No one in the locality came to the inspector's aid. He was believed to have information on the Knock-Long killers who we talked about last month. These kind of hold-ups, ambushes and isolated shooting incidents went on throughout the country on a smaller scale, and they had a cumulative effect on public opinion. The intensity of the conflict was nothing like it would be next year, but it would not be accurate to describe Ireland as being at peace either. So, to finish today, we're going to talk a bit about the Paris Peace Conference. So this will probably be the last time I talk about the Paris Peace Conference, which was then ongoing. There had been a lot of hope that the peace conference would deliver something for Ireland, and some apparently believed that US President Woodrow Wilson would back up his grand principle of the rights of small nations to self-determination. But it wasn't to be. There was never any realistic chance that the British Empire, a victorious power, would be pressured to give up Ireland. Frankly, there was never even any realistic hope that Ireland would even get a hearing in Paris, though an Irish-American delegation to the President did do its best. President Wilson put pressure on Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, to resolve the Irish question, but only in private. The Irish-American lobby within the Democratic Party was a source of problems, but for the time being at least, they were manageable. Wilson argued with George quite presciently, as it turned out, that the Irish question was allowing a certain prejudice against the League of Nations to grow. Wilson ultimately would not be able to get congressional approval for American entry into the League of Nations, a truly catastrophic outcome. The Irish-American delegation would have 2 interviews with Wilson, both quite testy. During the second of those meetings in this month, Wilson lectured the delegation on the realities of diplomacy, saying that all he could offer was unofficial pressure, what one might call today quiet diplomacy. He was quoted as saying, quote, "Of course Ireland's case from the point of view of population, from the point of view of the struggle they have made, is the outstanding case of a small nationality. You do not know and cannot appreciate the anxieties that I have experienced as a result of the many millions of people having their hopes raised by what I said." Unquote. Soon after this meeting, the delegation were officially told that the Irish case would not be considered, but I doubt that anybody was surprised at this point. The historian Michael Hopkinson summarised it well when he wrote, quote, "The failure in Paris drove Irish-American opinion into the arms of the opposition to the League of Nations in the US, and the Irish-Americans delegation work promoted the view in Ireland that the US was the key to any aspirations of international recognition of the Dáil," unquote. There was essentially 2 types of Republicans at this point. The lads out in the country getting weapons, shooting at people and preparing themselves for war. And there were the big beasts, thinking in terms of international recognition, international diplomacy, establishing a counter-state, forming revolutionary courts and parliaments. Both strands of the movement were indeed one and the same, but I always think it's interesting how little contact the lads out in the countryside had with the leaders, and to the great extent to which local leaders were dictating the day-to-day operations of the Irish Revolution. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon. Good luck now. Bye.